We can also modify the SSID configuration, so let's explore the simplest change of turning them off and on. Thanks to our Meraki Helpers module, enabling and disabling Meraki SSIDs is a relatively simple task. Let's open the change SSID state.py file to understand how it works. In addition to importing the common functions from our helper module, we also import the sys module. This will provide support for command line arguments, which are used to make our script more flexible. In the main function, we want to ensure the user enters exactly 3 command line arguments. argv is short for argument vector and contains a list of strings based on the command line text. The first item is always the name of the script, which in our case should be change SSID state.py. The next 2 items should be the SSID number and whether to enable or disable the SSID. For example, to ensure SSID 7 is enabled, we would pass in 7-1. To ensure SSID 9 is disabled, we would use 9-0. To keep the code easy to understand, I suggest using some local variables rather than indexing the argument vector. The SSID number attempts to parse an integer from the second item in the list, while SSID enable attempts to parse a Boolean from the third item in the list. If either of these parsing operations fail, a value error will be raised and crash the program, as these are unrecoverable errors. In Python, values like 0, the empty list, the empty string, and none all evaluate to false when transformed into a Boolean. I suggest using a simple print statement that just indicates the user's intent. If the user enters 4-1 as arguments, the print statement will say SSID 4 enable state being set to true. This should confirm the user's intention using plain English. Next, we need to find the DevNet network ID again, which is contained within the DevNet organization. All the logic is contained within the find network function we explored in the previous clip. To update an SSID, what kind of HTTP request should we use? According to the documentation, we should use a put request that includes the network ID and the SSID number in the URL string. This makes sense as the put operation is often used for updating existing resources compared to post, which is commonly used for adding new resources. The REQ helper function requires the resource string, but we can optionally override the method and JSON parameters accordingly. The JSON body just specifies the key value pairs to update, and in our case, we only want to change the SSID state. The REQ function will raise an HTTP error if the request fails, so we don't need to do that manually. After we receive the response, we convert the body to JSON format, which contains the updated SSID configuration. We can print out the updates and specifically reference the enabled key to ensure that the value is the same as our command line argument. Let's quickly run the script to enable SSID 14 using the command line arguments 14 and 1. The first line of output is reflected back before the request is processed, indicating that our intended state is to enable SSID 14. In the previous clip, you might remember that SSID 14 was previously disabled. Now, the script says SSID 14 has been enabled. How can we double check? I suggest running our getSSIDs.py script again for additional verification. Okay, this is what we expect because SSID 14 says enabled 1, which means true. Because this is a public sandbox, let's clean up after ourselves. I'll use our change script again, except with 14 and 0, so that we can disable SSID 14. This time, we want to transition from the enabled state to the disabled state. Let's double check this update by using our getSSIDs.py script once more. Perfect. SSID 14 is disabled, just like it was before we started. I'd encourage you to experiment with some of the other SSID options too, such as changing SSID names and other parameters. Just keep in mind this is a public sandbox, so be courteous and clean up after yourself. As a final note, The JSON ref directory contains some reference files containing HTTP bodies from various API calls. We looked at some of these in the previous clip, but I've included some SSID state change examples as well. Feel free to explore these files to enhance your understanding. Coming up next, we'll move away from the dashboard API and focus on collecting location information using Meraki.